74-year-old farmer Thomas Becket had lived on the edge of the Appalachian wilderness for 53 years. He knew every inch of his 800-acre Kentucky farm, knew the sounds of the forest, knew which animals passed through and which ones stayed. So when a wild Palomino foal appeared at his barn door at dawn, refusing to leave, Thomas knew something was wrong. The young horse was agitated, circling, calling out, and every time Thomas tried to approach, the foal would back away toward the tree line, then stop and look back. The pattern was unmistakable. Follow me. Against his better judgment, because at 74, a man knows the dangers of deep woods, Thomas grabbed his walking stick and followed the foal into the forest. What he found hidden in those dark woods, what was waiting in a place no human had ventured in decades, was so terrifying that Thomas would later tell investigators he'd never been more certain he was about to die. Because there, in the shadows, was something that explained why this foal had risked everything to bring a human into the wilderness. Subscribe now for incredible true stories that will leave you breathless. Thomas Becket woke at 5:30 a.m., same as he had every day for the past 5 decades. His wife Margaret had passed 2 years ago, and the house felt emptier now, but the rhythm of farm life continued. Coffee first, then morning chores, then breakfast. Routine was what kept a 74-year-old man going. But this morning, something was different. As Thomas walked to his barn to feed his 3 aging horses, he heard it, a young horse calling out, high-pitched and urgent. He opened the barn door to find a wild Palomino foal, probably 4 or 5 months old, standing just outside. The young horse had a cream-colored coat with white-blonde mane and tail, clearly wild, clearly alone. "Where's your mama, little one?" Thomas said softly, approaching slowly. Wild horses were common enough in the remote Kentucky hills, but foals this young didn't usually separate from their mothers. The foal backed away from Thomas's approach, but didn't flee. Instead, it moved about 20 feet toward the forest edge, then stopped and looked back. Then the foal whinnied, that same urgent, high-pitched call, and pawed at the ground. Thomas had been around horses his entire life. He'd raised them, trained them, delivered foals, and buried old friends. He knew horse body language better than he knew human expressions, and this foal was trying to communicate something specific. "You want me to follow you?" Thomas said aloud, feeling foolish for talking to a wild animal. But the foal's ears pricked forward at his words, and the young horse took several more steps toward the woods, then stopped and looked back again. Thomas hesitated. The forest that bordered his property was dense Appalachian woodland, steep terrain, thick undergrowth, and home to black bears, coyotes, and worse. At 74, with bad knees and a heart that had required a stent 3 years ago, following a wild animal into deep woods was not a wise decision. But something in the foal's eyes, in the urgency of its calls, in the deliberate pattern of its behavior, told Thomas, this wasn't random. This was a cry for help. Thomas went back into his barn and grabbed his heavy walking stick, his satellite phone, and a knife he kept for cutting rope. He told himself he'd follow for 15 minutes, no more. If he didn't find anything, he'd turn back. "All right," he called to the foal. "Show me what's so important." The young horse immediately turned and began moving into the forest, checking frequently to make sure Thomas was following. The foal led Thomas deeper into the woods than he'd been in years. The terrain grew increasingly difficult. Steep slopes, fallen logs, dense thickets of mountain laurel that grabbed at his clothes. Thomas's knees protested every step, and his breathing grew labored in the humid morning air. Several times, he considered turning back. But each time he hesitated, the foal would stop, look back with those urgent eyes, and whinny. And Thomas would continue. They'd been walking for nearly 30 minutes when Thomas realized they were in a part of the forest he'd never explored. This was old-growth woodland, untouched by logging, dense and dark even in daylight, the kind of place that held secrets. The foal's behavior changed as they went deeper. The young horse became more cautious, moving slowly, pausing to listen, ears swiveling to catch every sound. Thomas felt his own anxiety rising. Whatever they were approaching, the foal was afraid of it. Then Thomas heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. Growling, deep, rumbling, unmistakably predatory, and close. The foal froze, then pressed close to Thomas's leg, the first physical contact the wild animal had made. The young horse was trembling, but not running, still trying to lead Thomas forward, despite obvious fear. "Easy," Thomas whispered, his hand finding the foal's neck, offering comfort despite his own racing heart. "What's ahead of us?" They moved forward more slowly now, Thomas gripping his walking stick like a weapon, his other hand on the foal. Through the trees ahead, he could see movement, large shapes in the shadows. Thomas's first thought was bears. Black bears were common in these mountains, and a sow with cubs could be deadly. But the growling didn't sound quite right for bears. He took another step forward, and the scene before him came into focus. What he saw made him stop breathing. In a small clearing surrounded by dense forest, Thomas saw something that defied belief and filled him with primal terror. 3 massive dogs, or what had once been dogs, surrounded a Palomino mare. These weren't domestic animals. These were feral dogs, wild and dangerous, probably abandoned or lost from nearby properties, and now surviving as pack predators. But these weren't ordinary feral dogs. These were hunting breeds, pit bulls or mastiff mixes, each easily weighing over 100 pounds. Their coats were matted and scarred from fighting. Their eyes held the feral gleam of animals that had forgotten kindness and remembered only survival. And they had cornered the foal's mother. The mare was backed against a steep rock face, trapped. She was bleeding from several bites on her flanks and neck. The dogs had been attacking her, probably for hours, wearing her down. The mare was exhausted, swaying on her feet, but still fighting to protect herself. When she saw the foal appear with Thomas, the mare screamed, a sound of pure anguish and warning. "Get away. Danger." But the foal didn't run. Instead, the young horse moved toward its mother, and Thomas understood with horrible clarity what was happening. The foal had left its dying mother to find help, had somehow known that alone it couldn't save her, had made the impossible decision to seek out a human. The 3 feral dogs turned their attention to Thomas and the foal. The largest one, a scarred pit bull with one torn ear, began advancing slowly, head low, teeth bared. Thomas was 74 years old, armed with only a walking stick, facing 3 feral dogs that together weighed more than 300 pounds and had already shown they would kill. "Dear God," Thomas whispered. The led dog lunged. Thomas swung his walking stick with all his strength, connecting with the dog's head and sending it sprawling. But the other 2 were already moving, circling, trying to get behind him. The foal bolted toward its mother, and the mare, seeing her baby in danger, found a last reserve of strength. Despite her injuries, despite her exhaustion, She charged forward, teeth bared, hooves flashing. The clearing erupted into chaos. Thomas swung his stick again and again, fighting off one dog while the mare battled the others. He hit another dog across the back, hearing ribs crack. The animal yelped and backed away. But the largest dog recovered and came at Thomas again, this time faster, more determined. Thomas knew he couldn't survive another attack. He was too old, too slow. The dog leaped for his throat, and the mare was there. The Palomino mother slammed into the feral dog mid-air, her hooves catching it in the ribs and sending it crashing into the rocks. The impact was devastating. The dog didn't get up. The two remaining dogs, seeing their pack leader down and facing a still fighting mare and a human with a weapon, made a calculation. They fled into the forest. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by heavy breathing and the pounding of Thomas's heart. Thomas collapsed against a tree, his legs shaking so badly he couldn't stand. He was 74 years old, and he'd just fought for his life against feral dogs in deep wilderness. His heart was hammering, his hands were trembling, and he was fairly certain he might be having a heart attack. But he was alive. The mare stood in the center of the clearing, swaying on her feet, bleeding from multiple wounds. The foal rushed to her side, pressing against her, whinnying softly. The mare lowered her head to nuzzle her baby, a gesture of love that brought tears to Thomas's eyes. "Okay," Thomas said aloud, his voice shaking. "Okay. We need help. We all need help." He pulled out his satellite phone with trembling hands and called 911, explaining the situation as calmly as he could. Wild horse attacked by feral dogs. Human attacked. Deep in forest. Needed emergency rescue and large animal veterinary assistance. The dispatcher kept him on the line while coordinating response. Thomas gave his GPS coordinates and described landmarks. But even as he spoke, he was watching the mare with growing concern. The horse was losing too much blood. She was going into shock. "I need to stop the bleeding," Thomas told the dispatcher. "I have to try to help her." Thomas had basic first aid supplies in his pocket, things he always carried when working on the farm. Clean cloth bandages, antibiotic ointment, nothing adequate for wounds this severe, but something. Approaching the injured mare was dangerous. She was in pain, in shock, and wild. But when Thomas moved slowly toward her, speaking softly, the mare didn't flee. She stood still, as if understanding that he was trying to help. The foal stayed close to its mother, watching Thomas with those intelligent eyes. Thomas worked as quickly as his old hands would allow, applying pressure bandages to the worst wounds, talking constantly to calm the mare. "Easy, girl, easy. Help is coming. You saved my life. Now let me help save yours. Your baby needs you. That brave little one went and found me, brought me here. Smartest thing I've ever seen a horse do." It took 40 minutes for the rescue team to reach them. A large animal veterinarian named Dr. Sarah Morrison came with emergency equipment, along with 2 wildlife officers who'd been tracking reports of feral dogs in the area. Dr. Morrison assessed the mare quickly. "She's critical, but stable. We need to get her out of here and to my clinic immediately." The logistics were complicated. The terrain was too rough for vehicles. Eventually, a helicopter was called in, one equipped for large animal rescue. The mare was sedated, carefully loaded into a sling, and airlifted out. The foal ran beneath the helicopter as long as it could, calling out for its mother, until Thomas caught the young horse and held it. "She's going to be okay," Thomas told the foal, feeling foolish again for talking to an animal. "Your mama's going to be okay." The mare survived. Dr. Morrison performed emergency surgery, treating multiple deep lacerations, a punctured shoulder muscle, and severe blood loss. The recovery took months, during which the mare and her foal stayed at Thomas's farm, the wild horses accepting human care because survival required it. Thomas named them Hope and Guardian. Hope for the mare who'd fought against impossible odds, Guardian for the foal who'd saved them both by seeking help. The story made regional news. Foal leads elderly farmer to rescue mother from feral dogs. Wildlife Services launched an intensive operation to capture the remaining feral dogs, eventually removing 7 animals total from the forest. The pack had been responsible for killing deer, attacking livestock, and creating a serious public safety threat. But for Thomas, the headlines were secondary to what he witnessed during Hope's recovery. The intelligence this foal had shown, leaving its dying mother, finding human habitation, deliberately leading a human back through difficult terrain, was extraordinary. Dr. Morrison, who specialized in equine behavior, was equally amazed. Guardian made multiple complex decisions, Dr. Morrison explained during one of her visits. The foal assessed the situation, recognized its mother couldn't survive alone, understood that humans might help, located the nearest human habitation, and successfully communicated urgent need to a human. That's remarkable problem-solving and interspecies communication. Over the 6 months of Hope's recovery, Thomas formed a bond with the 2 horses deeper than any he'd experienced. Every morning, Guardian would nuzzle Thomas's hand in greeting. Hope would follow Thomas around the paddock, trusting him completely. When Hope was finally healthy enough to return to the wild, Thomas led both horses to the forest edge and opened the gate. They could leave. They were free. Hope and Guardian walked into the tree line, then stopped. Both horses looked back at Thomas for a long moment. Then Hope whinnied softly, not urgently, not fearfully, but almost like a thank you. Guardian took several steps back toward Thomas, reached out, and gently touched the old man's shoulder with his muzzle. Then the 2 horses turned and disappeared into the forest. Thomas stood at the fence line for nearly an hour after they'd gone, tears streaming down his weathered face. He thought about the morning Guardian had appeared at his barn. He thought about the terrifying battle in the clearing. He thought about the 3 months of recovery, of caring for these wild creatures, of being trusted by animals that had no evolutionary reason to trust humans. "Thank you," he whispered to the empty forest. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for letting me help." 3 weeks later, Thomas was working in his barn when he heard a familiar whinny. Guardian stood at the fence line with Hope, both horses healthy and glossy, clearly thriving in the wild. They'd come back to visit. Thomas walked to the fence and Guardian came close enough to accept gentle touches. Hope stayed further back, still cautious, but her eyes were calm and trusting. "You're okay," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're both okay." The horses stayed for 10 minutes, then melted back into the forest. They returned once a month after that, always briefly, always just to check in. And Thomas, who'd thought his life was winding down into quiet loneliness after Margaret's death, found that he had a reason to wake up each morning. He had friends in the forest. He had a bond with wild creatures that had chosen to trust him. He had proof that love and gratitude exist in all creatures, and that sometimes, when we're brave enough to follow where we're led, we discover that the terrifying unknown can transform into the most beautiful connection we've ever known. Hope and Guardian continue to visit Thomas Beckett's farm regularly, now accompanied by a new foal born to Hope in the wild. Thomas, now 75, works with wildlife services to monitor the wild horse population and ensure feral dog packs don't re-establish in the area. Dr. Sarah Morrison has documented Guardian's behavior as one of the most remarkable examples of equine intelligence on record, with the case study published in veterinary journals. The feral dog pack that attacked Hope has been completely removed from the area, with all captured animals either rehabilitated and rehomed, or in the case of the most aggressive individuals, humanely euthanized. Thomas has installed a special section of his fence where wild horses can safely approach for water during droughts, creating a peaceful meeting point between wild and domestic worlds. If this incredible story of a foal's impossible decision, an elderly man's courage, and a mother's will to survive moved you, subscribe for more extraordinary animal stories. Hit that like button, share this video, and tell us in comments. Would you have been brave enough to follow a wild foal into the deep woods? Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most terrifying moments lead to the most beautiful connections. Sometimes courage has 4 legs and a brave heart, and sometimes the wilderness holds not just danger, but the possibility of love that transcends all boundaries.